shit.
This is Too Old for This Shit. Each week we dissect, discuss and critique the best and worst action movies from the 80s and 90s. You're listening to the podcast that puts critical thought into a mindless genre. My name's Antonio and I'm here with my co-host Josh.
How are you doing out there?
And Josh grew up watching these films, whereas I am seeing them for the first time. So we're trying to give them a fresh perspective. Josh is going to see how these films stand the test of time.
So it doesn't matter if you watch these on VHS, DVD, or if you're streaming them on iTunes. We're going to bring a freshness to nostalgia.
So this week's movie is
The Long Kiss Goodnight.
Now, I'm actually really excited to watch this film because when I was in primary school, I had a couple of mates who saw it and would not stop talking about this film. I think it was also because it was the first MA-rated film they ever got to see.
Right.
But
rated R in America.
Right, yes. But yeah, I've always wanted to see it and just sort of haven't found the right opportunity. So I'm very pumped to be seeing
God bless
film.
this podcast for giving you the chance to
Giving me
watch Geena Davis.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I'm actually keen to see Geena Davis in an action film role because has she done many roles like this?
Cutthroat Island, which, well, people wish that she hadn't done.
Yes. One of the most infamous Hollywood bombs of all time. So
I'm trying to remember the first time I saw this movie. I'm going to say I probably saw it on tape sometime. I actually don't have a clear memory of seeing this movie for the first time.
And the other thing I think worth pointing out about this film is that it's a team up with Rennie Harlan and Shane Black.
Shane Black. Sean's brother.
Yeah. I don't know why I get that confused, even though I'm a massive fan. So Shane Black writing it and, of course, Rennie Harlan directing.
So all these years you've been writing letters to the Sean Black fan club and you've been getting it returned. You're like, why doesn't this guy appreciate my love?
No, nothing at all. So, yeah, fantastic writer. And obviously Rennie Harlan, a somewhat prolific director of the 80s and 90s. Or more so the 90s.
He was a player in the day.
So shall we get into it?
Let's do it. Let's watch this movie.
You think what I'm thinking?
I hope not, because I'm thinking how much my balls hurt. I don't think I want to meet any more of your old friends.
We have no choice. We need some answers or we're gonna die.
Okay, and we're back.
Yes.
The Long Kiss Goodnight. What a nice smooch.
Yeah. It wasn't that long. No, it was actually of a decent length.
The kiss or the movie?
The movie.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Antonio and I were kissing, but during the movie.
We can talk about that at the end of the podcast.
All right.
This is the first film that we've seen with a female lead, I think.
It is.
Yeah.
Geena Davis, an excellent actress.
Does an amazing job in this film. That's actually probably my biggest takeaway is she was perfect for it and bloody nailed it. To think she was able to handle both sides of that character really well. That was one thing I really liked.
I really enjoyed it. It's a nice neo-noir. It's good action sequences. The set pieces are all there.
Moves along really quickly. The first 45 minutes, they get through a lot and you're kind of thankful that they do until it actually gets into the proper meat of the film where it's like, okay, we know who she is now, but what exactly is she sort of all tied up in and what's going on?
And another kind of initial reaction I have is that the film, while it does have a 3-act structure, there's almost a break in the middle. It's almost a 2-act movie in the sense that there's the pre-Charlie Baltimore and the post-Charlie Baltimore.
Yeah. There's a definite kind of pendulum swing there where it just totally changes because her character changes and the film making kind of reflects that.
So we should go through let's do the plot. The Long Kiss Goodnight is the story of Sam Kane, a frumpy school teacher who's had amnesia for 8 years, but starts to get her memory back when she's in a car accident. After a visit from a vengeful escaped convict in which she snaps his neck like a pencil, she teams up with Private Eye Mitch Hennessy to find her true identity.
Now, it's revealed that she is actually Charlene Charlie Baltimore, a trained assassin who was supposed to be killed years ago as a relic of the Cold War by her CIA bosses. After nearly being drowned by her last target, her memory floods back and she transforms into being the kick-ass, hard-drinking, cynical killer of old.
Now, due to budget cuts, the CIA has teamed up with her old adversaries to concoct concoct a plot to blow up a small town and blame it on Muslim extremists in order to get more funding from Congress. When the CIA kidnapped Charlie's daughter, she and Mitch must find a way to save the kid and the town.
It may be Christmas Eve, but things are really heating up because it's in North America, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
I guess that's something for listeners. You'll probably realise that was written by Josh, who is North American. Otherwise, that doesn't make any sense for any Australians listening.
Or, hey, don't discount South Africans, Argentinians,
True.
Chileans, you know.
All those who enjoy a warm Christmas. So this film is, as we said earlier, directed by Rennie Harlan, who also directed Cliffhanger
Yep.
and Die Hard 2.
He was not the king, but he was the crown prince of the 80s and 90s action genre. But now mostly does TV and kind of low-budget action. He's not really doing the same caliber movies anymore.
Well, this film was after Cutthroat Island.
It was.
So Cutthroat Island, obviously the big film that bombed, but then still got to make this film. I wonder if, this film wasn't a huge success.
But it underperformed.
Yeah. So I have a feeling it's sort of the mid-90s were kind of when his career probably had a bit of a decline and he didn't get to do as much.
He was the biggest filmmaking export from Finland.
Yes.
He's now been surpassed by the Angry Birds movie. So
You're joking.
No, that's
really?
now the biggest Finnish movie ever.
Is that because Angry Birds is a Finnish
It's
act?
Rovio Entertainment is Finnish.
I'm so sorry, Rennie Harlan. I'm really sorry.
You could say Cutthroat Island kind of finished his career.
I'm not even going to linger at the scene of that crime. Speaking of Cutthroat Island, though, Geena Davis starring in this as well.
And they were married at the time.
Yes. And as I said before, written by Shane Black, who wrote the first Lethal Weapon film and has character credits on the rest of them.
He also wrote Last Boy Scout and did a rewrite on Last Action Hero.
I think we figured out over the last couple of weeks, Josh and I are big Shane Black fans.
Yes. Part of the Shane Black Mutual Appreciation Society.
Yeah, and watching this film, I could definitely appreciate his writing and his input.
You can see his hand in it, even though he's not directing the film, but it definitely feels like a Shane Black movie.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, we can't look over Samuel L. Jackson.
That man was born to do lines of dialogue like they gave him in this movie.
Oh my gosh. And yeah, both him and Geena Davis get some cracker lines in this film. And even some of the supporting cast like Brian Cox as well. I think that's probably the biggest strength of this film is it's endlessly quotable.
Yeah, and the characters are so strong. But that is a mark of Shane Black's work, is that while a lot of other action films don't have as strong character leads and stories that are driven by character, Shane Black's stories are always very heavily driven by character.
Yeah, as each character pops up in this film, you get that little repartee that really defines who they are.
And you get a sense of the world outside of the film. Just a great line is when Samuel L. Jackson bursts in on the John in the bed when he's doing the con about prostitution.
That is epic.
And he's like,
I actually preferred my favourite line in that was actually a different one. I quite liked when he said,
See, you're assuming I won't shoot your sorry ass, and everyone knows when you make an assumption, you make an ass out of you and umption.
great example, though, of Shane Black subverting a convention.
Yep.
And we'll get into that in filmmaking process because I want to go through some of the Shane Black kind of tropes that he hits in this movie, but that's another good one. Interesting aside, the John on the bed, Travers from Cliffhanger.
yes, yeah. I feel like he's a very standard actor to put into most action films and probably has done tons of them. And I feel like that role was kind of like
Beneath
pretty
him?
small. Yeah.
Was it beneath the prostitute?
He could have been.
He could have been on top.
He could have been either.
He could have been on bottom.
They could have done both.
Yeah, we shouldn't judge.
No.
We don't know. But yeah, well, and she went on. the woman who plays Samuel L. Jackson's sidekick, she was the lead actress in CSI New York.
Yes, yeah.
I'm trying to remember her name. It's a Greek name.
Melina Kanakaridis. Melina Kanakaridis. Yes, and Rex Lynn, who is credited as Man in Bed.
Rex Lynn, yes, plays the John who gets who gets conned.
Yeah. And I guess maybe the other one possibly worth pointing out is Craig Bierko, who plays Tim. You probably, if anything recent, he is the executive producer in the TV show Unreal, if you've been watching that. He's done a lot of TV stuff. Definitely not looking nearly as young or fit.
Right, okay.
As he did then. No.
But yeah, Geena Davis was a huge star at this time.
Yeah,
and I think it's really interesting. After this Cutthroat Island and this film, I'm not going to say her career tanks, but she doesn't really do the caliber of films that she had been doing before. She does like 3 Stuart Little movies after this in a row.
Right.
And I think she was on TV. She'd had her own TV show. But it's interesting that she went from being what I would consider, on par with like Julia Roberts as far as like acting clout and box
And this is
office
because we're
draw.
post Thelma and Louise.
Well, Thelma and Louise was huge hit.
yeah.
She'd won an Academy Award for Accidental Tourist.
Right.
And League of Their Own was also a popular movie.
Of course, yes, with Tom Hanks.
And Madonna.
Right.
Come on, Madonna in her greatest acting role. And Rosie O'Donnell before she got her talk show.
We seem to like to plot people's careers on bell curves. So I feel like we're on the decline of Geena Davis's to an extent.
Yeah. She never really has the same star power after this film, really, actually.
Right. Whereas Samuel L. Jackson, he's probably very much on the rise still.
Well, this is post
Pulp Fiction, post Die Hard 3, but there's definitely more to come.
Absolutely. And yeah, still, pulling out those great lines of dialogue.
Just, he's so good in this film.
I want to touch on Shane Black for one moment.
Yes.
This film, you can just see how steeped he is in the detective fiction genre and the noir. The title of the movie is actually an homage to Raymond Chandler, the great detective novelist.
Right.
The book is called The Long Goodbye.
Yep.
And that's the film that plays in the motel room when Samuel L. Jackson and Geena Davis are in the Dutch cabins.
I definitely felt like there is a bit of crossover between this and Kiss Kiss Bang Bang in tone. Like there was even one really interesting parallel with Brian Cox's character keeps a gun in his underwear, which is very reminiscent of Val Kilmer's faggot gun in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which I think is an interesting fixation for Shane to have.
It is. He wants firearms to be around men's genitals for some reason.
Well, it seems to be a device that he likes to go to. Is that no one likes to check there.
Yeah, I'll give you another one too. A parallel between this and Nice Guys. So when Trin finds Amnesia Chick's file and says, "Hey, we've got a lead on her," Samuel L. Jackson immediately goes, "Call her up, get more money off of her," which is exactly what Ryan Gosling's character does in Nice Guys. That's his whole MO is to milk the client and always say, "I need a little bit more money now."
Yeah. So there's another thing is that all 3 of these films involve private detectives in some way.
Last Boy Scout does as well.
Right. So there are definitely things that he likes to go to that are just, and obviously to do with how inspired he is by the whole noir genre.
And just, like the detective, the pulp detection fiction genre. I would almost go as far to say that this is as much a Shane Black film as it is a Rennie Harlan film.
The action scenes are very much Rennie Harlan. It's exactly what we've come to expect. And the dialogue, as I said, just endlessly quotable, moves along at a really good pace, and the character building is really good.
And the plot is driven by the characters' backstories.
Yes.
Which is a good way to segue into like what we think worked and what didn't. Because to me, that's one of the things that really works for me is that this film comes completely from the character's backstory and propels the action forward.
Yeah. I definitely, what I liked the most were all the little moments that each character had. Like Brian Cox's character when we first meet him and he's eating his lunch and his wife
Is that his wife? I thought it was his mother.
I don't know. It's
I'm not
basically
sure.
an older woman
Yeah.
has a dog on her lap that has been licking its ass for apparently 3 hours.
Well, what's wrong with the dog?
It's simple. He's been licking his asshole for the last 3 straight hours. I submit to you that there is nothing there worth more than an hour's attention. And I should think that whatever he is attempting to dislodge is either gone for good or there to stay.
And like, just those little bits I loved so much.
Because for that moment, we see into his world. He's the retired spook master, and we see into what his world is now.
And it's funny because I feel like Brian Cox is always a spook.
That's
That's just his MO.
That dude has been in so many movies, and he's an incredible character actor in the sense that he could just do all these different voices, and he's infinitely believable in every role.
The other thing also is Samuel L. Jackson's character singing everything. Put the gun in the left pocket, da-na-na-na-na, wallet on the right, or whatever. But like that, you wouldn't see that in any other films. Like it's just unnecessary. Some would consider unnecessary fluff, and it just bulks film out too much. But it helps to make him a really well-rounded character, unlike other sort of sidekicks you see in action films. So I really enjoyed that because it keeps you in there rather than just waiting for the next set piece.
So would you call him a sidekick? I wouldn't, because I mean, this is
Absolutely.
because I see this as really a buddy movie.
Yeah, but
It's her story. Okay, you're right. It is.
Yeah, it is very much her story. But I think they reversed the damsel in distress role, gender reversed it, especially when he says,
Sam, I'll be waiting for you to come rescue me.
Be just a minute.
yeah, he's always second fiddle. Like he gets kicked out of her car.
I mean,
But
he
yeah,
does
no, I
have
think-
he does have a slight arc. I mean,
Yeah.
I have my guess is that some stuff was cut out.
Right.
But he has a slight arc in the sense that he is after redemption in some sense because if from the scene tracking his character arc from the scene with his kid where his kid won't accept toys. Another interesting reference to Kiss Kiss Bang Bang.
yes.
Toys at
How did I
Christmas.
not even click on that? Oh my God.
So his son won't accept the toy because his dad is somewhat of a crook. You
Yep.
know, he did the wrong thing when he was a cop in Atlanta, and then moving towards some sort of redemption, where he goes out into a situation when Charlie's got the rifle scope and
Yeah.
is shooting the bad guys around him. He basically goes on a suicide mission to help save the kids. So he's trying to redeem himself in that sense.
The one thing that
And then
I
the final scene, sorry, to interrupt,
No.
but the final scene when he's on Larry King Live,
Yeah.
and his wife or his ex-wife and child see it and go, oh, I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of implied that Dad's a respectable person now because he's on Larry King.
even though he talks about how he cheats on women. that's his opening line on Larry King. One thing that I wouldn't say I didn't like but confused me a little is I wasn't 100% on why Samuel L. Jackson's character was linked to Geena Davis. I eventually made the link that he was just one of the private detectives that she hired, but I thought the implication was that she'd stopped doing that a couple of years ago. The reason why he would be still keeping track of that case, I didn't feel that clear to me, unless the implication is that he was still under her employ.
Yeah, the link is a little bit tenuous, and it's definitely a kind of contrived point that One-Eye Jack breaks out of jail and attacks her right at the same time that Samuel L. Jackson finds the clue that's going to lead to the next stage in the story. That's actually something that very much didn't work for me, and I hate this cliche, which is the guy who's in prison and then sees something on TV and gets so angry that he can break out.
Actually,
I hate that cliche. And it's like, okay, so prior to that, he was in jail, but could he have broken out? Couldn't he have? But the fact that he gets angry, that's what gives him the somehow magical ability to break out of prison now.
Yeah. For something it feels like it's something so monumental, which is just put away to 2 lines of dialogue.
Yeah, it's not easy to break out of jail.
No.
Okay?
And another thing that kind of, look, I understand that it was good for the pacing of the film, but the exposition dump of voiceover at the start in that first scene, I initially didn't appreciate it because I was like, oh, well, why not actually tell us in the story? But then before you know it, it's over and things are happening and you kind of forget about it. But initially I was like, I knew it was about someone who didn't know their identity, but for her to say I was I was born 8 years ago, and already it just felt like a really early point to build that drama for me. I thought it would start really slow and then ramp up. But it was a weird start to it for me. And again, I'm just not a huge fan of exposition dumps like that. The more discreet they can be, the more impressed I am.
The dream sequence too is when she gets hit by the car and starts getting her memory back.
Yeah, she's on the cliff with the lightning in the mirror.
That
and so
totally reminded me of this porno that my dad used to have.
Wow, okay.
This porno tape where it's like these two people fucking behind in front of a green screen and there's like lightning and shit going in the background.
There's a lot of questions that
we didn't watch it together. We didn't watch the porno together.
Okay,
maybe once.
I just didn't expect we'd go from action films to pornos quite so quickly.
It was just when I was watching that, I was like, oh yeah, that's like.
Is that because it reminds you of those bad special effects, or is it like?
No, it was just that
very similar mise en scène.
It was just these two people were. It was like an arty kind of porno.
Yeah, one of those arty ones. Going back to the character building of this film, and our argument over whether it's a buddy film or Samuel L. Jackson's a sidekick, you kind of forget how much we see his backstory at the start of the film, because then the rest of the story is really driven by Geena's character and what she needs and how he just helps her. Whereas I feel like in other buddy films, there's very much a 50-50, but I feel like the scales kind of really lean her way once they're together and they're off.
No, you're right. That is a good point. I mean, this is her story.
Yeah.
And whatever Mitch Hennessy's arc is given relatively minor coverage.
Yeah.
Whereas you're right, like on a lot of other buddy films, it's about how the two characters affect each other.
Yeah, which to a certain extent their stories do affect each other in that way. But yeah, ultimately I feel like his story of redemption, it's good that it's there, but it didn't really matter to me that much. I was happy for him to just be there and be the comic relief. But yeah, wasn't really interested in his story of redemption. Like, why did he steal the bonds?
Well, and this actually goes further to making your point that he is a side character. He's not. Yeah. It's not as much of a buddy film as maybe I originally thought. Because you're right. Like, why does he? Why is he corrupt?
He just says that he always makes mistakes.
Yeah,
but then again, and you could almost say the same for Charlie. Is that why is she such a ruthless killer? Yet there is this side to her that is more caring and empathetic than how she was in the past.
And that is another thing that, to me, we don't get enough of that dilemma within her as to who is she going to be. Is she going to be Sam Cain or is she going to be Charlie Baltimore? Is she going to be the mother? Is she going to be the assassin? When her daughter Caitlin gets kidnapped, it's just immediately towards, we got to save the kid.
Yeah.
I don't see enough of that internal struggle of, should I, go back to my old life? That does not include the kid, or should I, fight for my new life?
Yeah, we like the transformation into Charlie is that's done pretty well. It's like she's basically tortured into becoming, something she hasn't been since she suffered from amnesia.
And she has like the Rambo transformation, like the Rambo moment. Sexist, by the way. It's all her changing her cosmetic appearance.
Yes, no, that is a fair point, actually. But it does help visually. I think that it does help for there to be some kind of visual change. But as you said, like that is the only change, really. Otherwise, yeah, what's the point?
Well, you have it on a lot of those movies, where there's the scene where he's like straps on the gun, sticks the knife in the holder, tightens the bandana,
puts on the war paint,
waxes his mustache, Oh, no, wait. That's the only transformation that she goes through, and then she's instantly this other person. And Samuel Jackson's like, "Whoa, who are you?"
This film is definitely it's good, but there's a reason why it's not as awesome as Lethal Weapon or Die Hard. It doesn't really.
It doesn't tip the scales, does it? And that's what I found interesting watching this. I'm like, this is a good movie, but it's not a great movie.
No.
And there's a lot of things that put this ahead of the pack in a lot of ways, but nothing that really truly makes it great.
Yeah, and we start looking at the motivations of the bad guys. That's also, I feel like, when it really falls off the rails a bit. It's like the CIA want more money. Yeah, but Why?
Well, this is interesting because this is actually the cultural context of the piece
Right,
that
okay.
possibly you don't
No.
you don't pick up on as much. So this is the period in the 90s when it's the post-Cold War. So the reason it's given why Charlene is assassinated is she's this kind of unhinged, cynical, killer
Yep.
who's a relic of the Cold War that they don't need anymore. So they bump her off.
Right.
And Timothy and One-Eye Jack are responsible for, to kill her, but they actually don't. She, falls in the ocean and gets amnesia.
So is it worth pointing out at that point that, at around that point, the CIA have recruited Timothy and One-Eye Jack to get rid of it? Or is it just because Timothy and One-Eye Jack were people that she was trying to bump off and they bumped her off instead?
The CIA hires them. Right. That's the conceit, is that the CIA has to, because of budget cuts, the CIA has to get into bed with the old criminals. So like Daedalus is a weapons smuggler.
Yeah.
David Morse's character.
They're hiring other people because they have budget cuts because they need to get rid of someone else?
Well, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing. The plot is a little bit confusing. But what I understood is that Charlene's bumped off as a CIA employee.
Right.
And so, but they're not necessarily hiring Daedalus and Timothy on a full-time basis.
They're just contracting people. Right.
They're contracting people, or they are looking the other way for their gun-running, smuggling operations in lieu of doing work like, what Project Honeymoon is, blowing up a small town and blaming it on.
It's like, we'll just blame it on the Muslims.
And I don't think you could do this film again in the same way. I don't think you could use the same conceit of, blame the Arab terrorist.
Well, I feel like this film's too lighthearted for that to be at the center of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Muslims are at some point good at, what's another example? Peacemaker is one.
Right. I always think of True Lies. That's a film that I've seen a lot, and then that has a very stereotypical Arab character as the villain.
I'm trying to think of the Nicolas Cage movie Snake Eyes.
Right.
Also, it's a similar plot point. They blame the problems on an Arab terrorist, but it's actually a false flag, as in this movie.
That's interesting that pops up a couple of times. That it's an American blaming it on who everyone else would expect, and I think that's probably used to try and make the stakes a little bit higher to a certain extent, because that really plays with sense of trusting the government or whatever. It's like, oh no, they could actually be super corrupt and have some weird reason to kill hundreds of people, but make it look like it wasn't them at all for their own reasons.
Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty frightening.
That's where the whole post-Cold War era idea kicks in, is that so the Russians are no longer the stand-in bad guy, or communism or whatever are no longer the stand-in bad guy. The wall has come down. Communism is no longer the threat. Those people can't be the automatic bad guys. And so there's an internal unease with America as to trying to find who is the new bad guy, the new stand-in bad guy for the communists, or some sort of offshoot of that.
Right.
So who's going to be the stand-in evil person? Arab extremists. Sometimes it's the Chinese.
That seems like a really dangerous problem to have, that a country is struggling to know who they're supposed to hate next.
But that's the thing. That's where this film sits in the zeitgeist. Because the wall came down. Yeah. It wasn't just geopolitics that was affected. It was Hollywood as well. This had ramifications in everything.
Right, yes. And so that's why this film doesn't have very strong villains, is because of the Berlin Wall coming down.
But it's a gray area. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
Is so the CIA goes from being automatically the good guy to now the CIA is in this murky relationship with weapons dealers.
Right.
And they are now kind of bad but kind of good. And Charlie's trying to figure out, should I be the school teacher? Do I want to go back to this world of being an assassin? It's all steeped in this gray area, which is very noirish as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is a Shane Black thing. But what I'm saying is, even the Bond franchise, when the Bond franchise picks back up in 1995.
With Brosnan and Goldeneye.
Yeah. That is, a major element of the Bond films. Actually, well, throughout the entire Pierce Brosnan oeuvre. Oeuvre. It's oeuvre.
Keeping it in.
Yeah, the entire Pierce Brosnan oeuvre of Bond films really deals with this, as in we don't have the black and white, Spectre, the evil corporation, the evil masterminds, Russia, the evil monolithic state, it's all become very murky and gray as to who is the bad guy. And that's what the Bond franchise deals with a lot in this era. And this film is also set perfectly in that cultural zeitgeist.
That's fascinating. I wouldn't have even thought of something like that to really have much of an impact. I mean, it is obvious that, there was a period where, Russians were evil in film, and then it was Muslims. And
there's this element there where it's like the world is trying to find its feet again as to who the enemy is. And as a result of the Cold War ending, the CIA's budget has been cut. And that's the line that the president said.
You dump a mess like this in my lap, and then you come whining to me and say, where is our funding? Well, I'll tell you where it is. Can you say health care?
Yeah, he makes that comment, and then a bit later in the film, there's also a jab from the president, or at least as to where the money is going. But yeah, sort of that motivation there, and just Tim just being so damn evil. It just kind of, it didn't really do much for me. And actually, Tim's character in general, he had some great dialogue, but it's again that thing of characters just being evil for the sake of being evil. And I feel like that was maybe that's just in the 80s and 90s, that is just a trope. It's like you just assumed that whoever the film told you was the bad guy, they had their reasons and it didn't really matter. Whereas I feel like now there's always a bit of a grey area there. But these villains don't have that.
We've moved into a more gray area in terms of like who's good and who's bad.
Yeah.
And I think that really starts in this post-Cold War era.
Right.
It's like, is Charlie a good person or a bad person? The Geena Davis's
because she's
persona.
working for the government, but she just likes to kill people.
Yeah, she's kind of unhinged, like in a sense. Like,
yeah, for
she's
sure.
drinking and driving, like.
That's an interesting thread that kind of, not even that, but also like drinking and smoking, and how that is like addressed often in the film. So like her boyfriend at the start makes that gag about not drinking and smoking, then turns out he is. She tells off the kid for trying to steal smokes, which then comes back around when she comes back and then has a drag of his cigarette and makes him wet his pants. Yeah, it's just funny how that
Great insert work there, Rennie.
That was actually one of the most convincing pants wetting scenes I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, you've seen a few?
I feel like it's
up close.
Not that close.
Oh, okay. It's not a POV shot, is it?
No.
Okay.
But it was quite visceral, that shot of like the kid pissing his pants. Like, wow, that actually, it looks like he did do that in that
Maybe
moment.
he did. Like, maybe he's method. Like, maybe he's a method actor.
Method 10-year-old.
Yeah. One other thing I do want to mention about the cultural context of this film is that when this spec script sold, it was the highest ever recorded money amount for a spec script.
At that time?
At the time.
Right.
It was sold for $4 million.
That's a lot of money for 80 pages.
Yeah.
So it's actually interesting because we don't really, one of the things that Hollywood is criticised for is there aren't a lot of original ideas, at least in amongst our sort of blockbuster big films. A lot of studios are buying franchises, whether they be books or comic books, and then turning those into film franchises. Whereas something like this, which is a script that a writer has written and then a studio has bought to make, you don't really see that very much.
It's not done as much. I mean, this is, and in some ways, this film sounded the death knell for spec scripts, because the sale of a spec script for $4 million was seen as obscene. It's not necessarily that this movie was the, catastrophic end of the spec script market, but it started a decline in spec script sales.
Well, it would have overvalued them.
Exactly. So the spec script market had heated up too much. Another example is Joe Esterhaus, whose spec script for Basic Instinct sold for $3 million.
Right.
A Brian Hagelin script called Ticking Man, which sold for $2 million, which was never produced.
Yeah, right, okay.
But had Bruce Willis attached for many years. So there was a lot of money being spent
On writers.
on writers.
Yeah.
And the specs market had really been heating up to the point where the bidding wars between studios were going up and up and up and up and up to the point where studios, also the model, the funding model for how films were made changed because of the declining VHS and DVD market and the internet as well.
Well, yeah. By the new millennium and sort of later on, sure. But yeah, no, it just sounds like that the financial model became unsustainable and they had to change things, especially when you're paying writers more than you ever have before. And they're probably some of the most underpaid sort of creatives in the filmmaking process.
Well, there was a very brief period, and Shane Black definitely, it was the kind of enfant terrible of this, where these certain select group of writers were getting huge paydays for script sales. And
Right.
they were getting Joe Hesterhaus, Brian Hagelin, and a few other people. And it was sort of born out of the 1988 writer's strike, when a lot of writers had time on their hands and wrote. And so the market was flooded by spec scripts. The other reason
After
why...
the strike.
Yeah. But the other reason why the spec script market was able to heat up was because it was in the days pre-internet and pre-email. So no scripts could be emailed. Executives had to drive to a place, to a location at the talent agency, read the script kind of under lock and key, and then leave. And then there was no way that, in the old days, you could
steal a script, essentially. It was a lot harder for them to just, be plagiarized or something like that.
But I think this is a really interesting period especially in the early 90s, when a lot of original material is being produced.
Yeah.
And a lot of original ideas are being produced. And not to say that, film franchises are not based on original ideas, but the movement out of that definitely takes place after this film. And in some ways, this movie sounds the death knell for that, because it was a $4 million script sale.
Yeah.
And the movie underperformed at the box office.
Yeah, right. It's interesting because it's a film that hasn't left a huge impact. Like, I don't think many people would really know this film, even though it was unique in that an action film with a female lead, and an actress who, as we said before, was kind of at the height of her powers, or at least starting on the decline. But
I think Cutthroat Island started the decline.
Yeah, well, is part of that sort of drop.
I wonder if Cutthroat Island, because it was a well-publicized failure, if that did not also contribute to this movie failing as well.
Because again, it was Rennie Harlan and Geena Davis only the year after. Like, it actually wasn't. It's quite soon that these films coming out. Though it's almost as if they film one and then the other straight off the back of each other.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, well, because I don't think this film probably would have been made if it was any longer than that.
Yeah. Well, their marriage didn't last much longer than
no. It's just interesting to see that how this film is actually kind of quite important in a Hollywood sense. That it affected the way films are made to a certain extent.
Look, and I think it's an example of. I think this film has been set as an example of why the spec script market cooled. I don't think it is the reason. I think there was a lot of reasons leading up to this point that the spec script market begins to cool. But I think this film is a convenient scapegoat for that. So, Mr. Cafasso, tell us about the filmmaking process.
Well, yeah, I mean, as we've pointed out before, this looks like any other Rennie Harlan film. I do think the dream sequences were a bit out of left field for me. I didn't really expect them. I don't think they were necessary, probably. But this film moves quickly. That first 45 minutes, I don't think there's a scene that is longer than 3 minutes in that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it moves really quickly.
Runtime of about 2 hours?
Yeah, we get all of those characters and enough dialogue from each of them to really develop them. Yeah, there wasn't much that stood out for me overly with the filmmaking. Like some of it was a bit heavy-handed, I feel like, especially we spoke about before the transition from her going from Sam to Charlie and then back again.
I like that though. I mean, I think there are definitely some kind of, feminist problems with that.
Yes.
But it's like that, that her physical transformation is what signifies a change on her inside as well. But I get from a filmmaking point of view, you have to make a statement that like she's a different person now. This is her other persona. You need to see that other persona come out.
And that's what I think it was. It's an easy way to show that change. And in the dream sequences it kind of works well because, she's got her brown hair looking into the mirror. Actually, this wasn't even a dream sequence. This is in one of the hotels they stayed at. And
that's a dream sequence though. I mean,
was it?
Yeah, she's fantasizing.
Either way.
Yeah.
And yeah, the woman in the mirror is her with the blonde hair and how she was beforehand. Like that as a visual cue, it's a lot more obvious for the audience rather than if
so that's too heavy-handed to you.
No. I think overall it was some of the transition points, like her all of a sudden saying to her daughter at the ice skating rink,
Stop being a little baby and get up.
I can't skate anymore. My wrist hurts.
Life is pain. Get used to it.
her demeanor like really changes. It did feel a little bit strange. I think what I'm saying is that the visual change of her character helps for those moments where we are showing sort of the good side, her now and how she was before. Like I think that helps visually rather than she would just have a different facial expression rather than having the blonde hair in the mirror. I think that's definitely it helps to communicate that message.
Well, yeah, her whole style of dress changes. Instead of wearing kind of loose-fitting, baggy dresses and sweaters and stuff, she goes to wearing a very sleek jogging suit almost.
Yeah, I did have a problem with the fact that they referred to her suburban side as frumpy and just to the point of like she had a massive ass, which she just didn't see. Like that didn't make sense for me at all.
Yeah,
it's more to refer to the fact that she sort of was more, I guess, subdued and not as, I don't know, I guess not as out there as she is as the assassin.
Yeah, and I suppose the inciting incident which leads Sam Cain to transition into Charlie Baltimore is the accident on the road with a deer.
Yeah.
So she's thrown clear of the car, which I don't know why she didn't die in that. But
yeah, there's a couple of issues.
There's a few little movie things like that. Like she's thrown clear through the windshield and then snaps the deer's neck.
And also the animatronic deer on the hood of the car. Don't know if that needed to be there. Like, you don't need to show the deer writhing on the hood of the car while they're cruising along and before they hit the tree, just to establish. But is that there so that we establish that the deer is still alive and then she snaps its neck? Like,
I think that's it.
The deer just could have stirred like in the snow, which it did anyway.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like there's probably, obviously that was the best way they could have done something like that in the mid-90s, but it didn't need.
It didn't work for you.
No.
But see, to me, like it's interesting that the transition is slow. Like you start to see cracks in her personality. She swears at her daughter at the ice skating rink. She gets the use of the knife and chops the vegetables.
It's what chefs do.
Yeah, it's what chefs do. Like little bits of her memory.
She
keep
gets
coming
more
back.
aggressive.
Yeah, and like it's every piece of trauma awakens something within her.
Yeah,
which is interesting. I mean, I guess how do you do a thing like that? Like, because it's either you show it incrementally or you show one big change.
Yeah.
And so what they've done here, what they've elected to do here is have little incremental bits of the Charlie Baltimore persona showing through, and then ultimately
the torture sequence that ultimately transforms her.
Yeah. And that's what, then she is only Charlie Baltimore after that.
Yeah.
How did you feel about the action sequences in general, though?
Pretty good. Like, I think they do have that Shane Black thing of they move the story forward. They aren't there just for the sake of it.
Yeah, well, true. Like the shootout at the bus station, that's motivated by Geena Davis needing to meet Brian Cox.
Yeah, exactly.
Her
And
old
then-
handler.
And then, of course, you know, the CIA have been tapping Brian Cox's phone because they knew that eventually she would try and contact him. Like that, that all kind of, it moved along well. And then, of course, when she meets up with her fiance, who she had an engagement with.
Who's actually her target, too.
Well, yeah, it was a really quick line from Brian in the car. He was just like, oh, yeah, that's actually just agency speak for she's going to kill him. Like, that's who that is.
And see, to me, that's a good example of using the character and using the backstory to tell the story.
Yeah.
So we should go through the Shane Black trademarks that this movie has.
Yep.
So
So
it hits a lot of them. So I'll list them all. I'll give you my list.
Yep.
So Christmas, movie set at Christmas.
yes.
Mismatched duo as protagonists. Although
Yes.
the convention is played with a little bit because it's a
Yep.
man and a woman. Sharp dialogue, a plot involving a conspiracy,
Yep.
narration at the beginning of the film. This film, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang,
Yep.
and Nice Guys all feature narration at the beginning.
Right.
I don't know, does Iron Man 3? I
I
haven't
was
seen
about to
it.
say I need to rewatch Iron Man 3, I think.
And because Iron Man 3 is set at Christmas, isn't it?
Oh, God, you're really testing me now.
I'm pretty sure it is.
yeah, right.
Shelving and reintegration of ideas. So the smoking by the kid who pees his pants at the end.
yep.
And the scene on the ice rink when Geena Davis shakes her daughter and says, you know, life is pain, you know. And it's like, if it turns out her wrist is broke, you know, that comes back at the end when the daughter is trying to rouse Geena
Yeah.
Davis.
Yeah, actually, I'd totally forgotten about that.
There's a lot of this, but that's a real common thing is the reintegration of lots of little ideas like that.
And let's not forget the gun in underwear.
Gun and underwear. I missed that one. I didn't pick up on that one. But playing with conventions as well, and the Samuel L. Jackson line of an assumption is a ass out of you an umption. You know, subverting those things of, you know, that we would typically, you know, just accept in a movie. You know, like Ryan Gosling punching through a glass pane
so
in
good.
Nice Guys and then cutting his wrist really badly, or Robert Downey.
We should just review the Nice Guys, shouldn't we? Or Kiss Kiss Bang Bang for that matter.
But this is to me, this doesn't depreciate, and this is, I think, this is the power of Shane Black, is it doesn't depreciate my enjoyment of those films.
Yeah.
That he reuses ideas.
And I think what's most successful in action films, and I don't know if we've spoken about this before, is the underdog element, is that the person that you're rooting for needs to be overcoming totally like almost impossible odds and showing that they are not perfect. And it's something that I think who best uses that is a Jackie Chan fight scene is always an amazing example of that. He's always underhanded in some way, and a lot of Shane Black's characters, you see that they're not perfect. They fail at stuff. They're often I guess the parallel between Mitch Hennessy's character and Robert Downey Jr.'s character in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is that, as we said, they are constant failures.
Riggs in Lethal Weapon. Riggs is about.
I haven't seen
Oh, you haven't?
Remember the purpose of this podcast.
Spoiler alert. It's not. I'm not giving away an essential element of the plot. Riggs is about to commit suicide in the opening scene.
I think I've seen like the first 10 minutes of it.
Yeah.
And so Riggs is Mel Gibson's character.
Yeah, Riggs is Mel Gibson.
I do remember that.
He's
part.
suicidal.
Yeah. So that's the thing. He's labeled as like this crazy dude in the department.
He's unhinged.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like that's, a protagonist who's deeply troubled. Bruce Willis's character in Last Boy Scout as well.
Right.
Another good example of deeply troubled character.
Yeah. And that's sort of seems to be the formula that makes these, really interesting and multi-dimensional action films that, you don't see many of them because not everyone's doing it the way he does.
So here's another interesting thing about Shane Black is while you and I both kind of wax fantastic about how good he is, I wonder, is he held in such high esteem, among other people?
Well, that's the interesting thing is that apart from Lethal Weapon, like none of his other films have been absolute runaway successes. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang has a little bit more than a cult following.
Well, Iron Man 3 was huge.
But but
Is that
Iron
the
Man 3
franchise?
is a Marvel film. And like The Nice Guys is fine, but it hasn't really left a huge impression.
It was not a hit either.
Yeah. To the point where I remember reading someone sort of paying out on Ryan Gosling and saying, like, he just plays the same character in every film, including Nice Guys, which is a piece of garbage. It's like, well.
Have you seen, he obviously hasn't seen The Notebook. Hello. Okay, sir. So,
Yep.
you've now seen 2 Rennie Harlin films.
I have.
How did the final action sequence of this movie compare to the final action sequence of Cliffhanger?
Okay, the fact that the kid goes in the compartment on the truck is a bit contrived, but
I will hand you that one gladly. That I also had that criticism.
It didn't. I wasn't as disappointed by it as with Cliffhanger. This was much better. The one thing that I did think about is that I don't think I've seen many Americans rush to the Canadian border like that since Trump got elected. Thank you. I'm here all week. I felt like it was pretty good. It was the only thing.
I thought it was really, the final action sequence was really good.
Yeah, I thought you were testing me then. There's nothing super stood out to me apart from when the kid got in the truck. But then it wasn't nearly as big a deal as all the crap that happened at the end of Cliffhanger.
Yeah, they do cover their ass though in Long Kiss Goodnight because Charlie shouts to her daughter, "Hide, sweetheart, hide."
Yeah, but
it's very contrived that the one place she goes to hide is the nuclear, is the huge
chemical
bomb.
weapon. But then also the whole thing of obviously Charlie isn't dead when her daughter runs back to her, but she essentially revives her by berating her like she was when she was on the ice skating rink. I gotta say, I didn't really believe in that moment.
Okay, I felt as far as like learning from your mistakes, I thought Long Kiss Goodnight did a really good job of keeping the action going without it being super contrived. Just like to the point where I'm like, at the end of Cliffhanger, I just checked out. I was like, whatever.
I think maybe that part of that problem is that we're comparing a film about rock climbing and then a film about like an assassin.
Right. Okay.
So the action that was the thing with Cliffhanger, is that you needed a reason for the action to exist. Whereas when you're talking about people who their job is to kill other people, the action is kind of part of the narrative in that sense.
I love the final shot of Geena killing Timothy, of when she cuts the line as the burning body of a man is hanging there with his machine gun out, and as she cuts the weight, and as the line goes up, she grabs his machine gun from his burning corpse, fires at Timothy, kills him.
Yeah, when she shot up the helicopter and the fire started, but it was only like for 5 seconds. You kind of go, oh, is that helicopter going to blow up? And then it kind of goes away and moves on to something else. And then it comes back to that burning body. Like that was...
that. She slides up, grabs
that moment was great because
and blasts him. And then as she slides down, breaks all the Christmas lights.
Yeah, that was cool. Her sliding down the Christmas lights. But like that, her pulling that gun, that was very reminiscent of when she was attached to the water wheel, grabs a gun from Brian Cox's body and comes up and shoots all the guys. Like it wasn't contrived because we'd seen that moment already. Like we know that that's what she is capable of, and that was the only way to get out of that situation. She didn't have a gun.
I liked it.
That didn't feel contrived at all. That felt like that's what she would do. She's a bloody CIA assassin. She's amazing at what she does. That's not outside of her scope.
How the metal from the gun didn't scald her hand.
We don't know how long it was burning for, and it's hard to know how hot the gun was.
I'll give it to him. I don't care. The sequence was so cool. I was just like, whatever.
I think if you
she's got third-degree burns on her hands now. She's never going to caress her child's face with that disfigured, munted paw of hers. Because the metal has scalded her skin.
I think if you're arguing about the temperature of metal from a burning body, you are dissecting you're giving an action film way too much credit.
True. And also Samuel L. Jackson survives being blown out of a third-story window through the sign into the tree. He survives that, so we can give it a pass.
But actually, that's an example of a classic villain moment, is that they're like, oh, we got to get rid of Samuel L. Jackson. Oh, let's put him in the car that's supposed to be the car bomb or whatever it was. Because he was in the car with the guy
with the
that
terrorist,
was
the
supposed to be
frozen
the
terrorist.
terrorist. So they're basically implicating him in that. But then essentially it means that the sidekick is there to help save the day, which, again, his revival is reminiscent of Charlie's revival at the end of the film with her daughter. It seems a little too convenient, but because it was Samuel L. Jackson, and because I don't know anyone who wouldn't have loved his character by the end of it because of the dialogue that he had, I was happy to see him come back. You almost miss him at a certain point. The film was lacking in Sammy Jackson, and then they brought him back from the dead, and you're kind of like, yes, Samuel L. Jackson.
You want him. Yeah, he saves the day. You want him there.
Yeah. So this film did enough and didn't take itself too seriously, that moments like that you're happy with, because it makes the film exciting again. Well, not again, but keeps it exciting. So, all right, look, I feel like we have gone in and out of this film at every angle, and we have given Shane Black an epic blowjob. Ultimately, what do you think of this film?
I like it, and I also see that it is in his canon. It's definitely not risen that high, I think, because of the fact that it was sort of a box office disappointment at the time. Yeah, it hasn't it hasn't stood the test of time. Well, let me put it this way. I think the film stands the test of time well, and it doesn't date that badly, but it doesn't leave as much of a legacy as some of his other movies maybe have.
Yeah, I don't think it doesn't leave a lasting impression. It's definitely one of those films that you probably would go to see at the cinemas, but then, and talk about it the next day and then forget about it a week after. But it serves its purpose relatively well. I definitely enjoyed it and can see why my 10-year-old mates would have loved the shit out of this film, because I reckon they watched it multiple times. They were genuinely like, this is so cool, it's so violent, it's amazing, and it's funny, and there's a lot of swearing. And I was like, I can't wait to see this film. So yeah, it definitely lived up to those expectations and was clever enough that I didn't that I enjoyed the ride.
Yeah, I find it sitting in this really weird place, whereas in a lot of ways I can't really fault it that much, but at the same time I'm like, it's a good but not great movie. We've arrived at this kind of odd place where there's a lot of elements we like, but it doesn't lead to an overall, nothing pushes it over the edge. It's not a Pulp Fiction, it's never going to be
It's not transcendent. No.
It's never going to transcend.
No. And for me, I think I would give it 4 out of 7 furiously diced tomatoes.
Oh, good one. I was going to give it 7 out of 10 Christmas crackers.
Lovely. Beautiful.
I need a better one. 7 out of Christmas crackers is lame.
Because I was trying to think of something else that's iconic in the film.
That was really good. Yeah, there is nothing iconic. That's exactly the other...
Yeah, no.
This is. I think in our stupidity, we've stumbled upon it. In the very last thing we're going to say about this movie is that there's nothing iconic about this movie.
Yeah,
that's what it is. Yeah, it will stand as a good action movie, but because there's nothing iconic about it,
which is a shame, because it's like Geena Davis in this cool two-toned role.
Yeah. I don't know.
I think we've cracked it.
Yeah. We've broken the spine. And this has been Too Old for This Shit. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.
And just before we go, we got to do it. We got to plug social media.
Like us on Facebook at TOFTS Podcast and follow us on Twitter at TOFTS Podcast to stay up to date and send us any movie review suggestions. Make sure you also subscribe on your podcasting app of choice and leave us a review. It helps.
It really does. I tell you, if your friend had a box of tissues, he needs to watch The Notebook.
And everyone, if you subscribe now, you can listen to Josh's podcast, which is I Love Ryan Gosling.
Yeah, it's a new podcast.
There's got to be one that already exists.
Oh,
I think
I'm sure it does.
You're behind the 8 ball of that.
Whole podcast about Ryan Gosling every single week. All Gosling all the time. They could even go back and watch like the episodes of Young Hercules that he started as a child actor. It was filmed in New Zealand. Oh,
Wow. Really?
let's do that. Fuck this shit. Let's do a Gosling podcast. That's how we're gonna be rich, man. Let's do a podcast about Gosling.